It is a battle as old as time. Coke versus Pepsi, milk chocolate versus dark, USX versus DBX. Who wins? Who wins? The answer is we all win because we have both of them. That was the message of my battle versus myself, my USX versus DBX battle of me versus me. But actually, I'm trying to show you a few different things here. Number one, from a purely mechanical perspective, I want you to see the difference in appearance and capability of these two different mechanical styles. If you're new to cracking the code, now is about the time when you're probably like, what the hell is this guy talking about? What are DBX, USX, and so on, and why do I care? Fair. The thing that put cracking the code on the map when we first started making public lessons for the YouTube channel was the reveal that alternate picking isn't just one thing. There are actually different categories of alternate picking motions based on the way they travel from one string to another. This property in cracking the code is what we call escape, and it exerts an influence over the kinds of phrases you can play, especially as you speed up. I'm going to link you down in the description to a free technical reference on our site with a handy Wikipedia-style presentation of these concepts. We've got infographics, animations, some short video clips from interviews we've conducted with amazing players. It's a great overview, which is actually part of our core instructional sequence, the pick slanting primer. And again, this part of the primer is free to read right on our site. So check out that wiki page when you get a moment, and I think that will give you a good idea of what we're talking about. And now, back to the lesson. First and foremost, let's take a look at the form and make sure we understand what the difference is. Here's our DBX form where we have our piece of form anchor, our lightly supinated arm position, our vertical pick slant, and our motion that kind of goes more sideways, following the wrist path, as we've discussed. Okay, and then to get to USX, we flex a tiny bit, turn a tiny bit, and either rest on our fingers or extend them to the body. And then we get our downward pick slant, and it looks like this. Now, if I have my fingers extended in one form and curled in another, gently curled in another, using our minimal effort pick grip, right? Then the difference between these two might be a little bit more obvious to an untrained observer. But if I keep my fingers in a curled form for both of them, and I switch between these two motions, for more than a few feet away, it's going to be really hard for anybody but an expert to spot the difference. Here's DBX, and here's USX. And I'm accenting that on purpose. The change isn't doing that. I'm just doing that so you know when I'm switching, so you can kind of try to spot the difference. But it's literally just this much of a form change. Because these are both being done from a more or less reverse dart posture, that means that we can easily switch between these two motions, if not inside of a phrase, or maybe for sections of a phrase, and certainly for entire phrases, one after the other, if I need to. You can easily, certainly in an improvisational context, play like a 2-note or 4-note or 6-note per string type of lick. That would be a classic USX pattern, and you can definitely do it with USX. Classic pentatonic 6s lick being a great example. And then you can switch to DBX for doing things that DBX is better at, like 3-note per string scales. And that's kind of typically how I do it. I would use the one for one thing and the other for the other thing on a phrase by phrase basis. Or let's say, it becomes a little bit semantic, but if it's a group of notes and I can stick in that one format for a section of time, then I'll do it, and then I can switch to a different form for another section of time and play a different group of notes. The forms here really are not that far apart. Again, here's my DBX form, and here's my USX form. And the key thing to know also mechanically about this is that it's not just the form that's different, it really is a change in wrist motion. If you look at the difference in the escape trajectory, DBX is mostly a sideways motion, whereas USX is quite a different motion path. It goes up in the air fairly vertically. And the change in form that we're making is slight enough that there is not enough forearm rotation that I'm doing to cause that complete change. So the fact that the motion path looks so different in USX means that the wrist is actually changing its direction of motion. So there's a lot going on under the hood, but to learn these things, we mainly just think of the big picture ingredients. Where am I anchoring? What is my arm position? And how do I think about the motion in order to make it work? In the DBX thing, I'm following the wrist path, and in the USX thing, I'm following this USX path, which may perhaps involve a rest stroke to help me get that vertical motion path. Why would I want to learn these things, or why are we teaching these things? Well, they're two very capable picking styles that can both be done from a very similar form. It's easy to switch between the two. You don't necessarily have to know both of these. And in fact, we've developed, of course, a healthy respect for the difficulty of learning any of these styles at Cracking the Code. So if you can get any one of these, it's an awesome thing to be able to do. If you can get both, more power to you. But the way we look at it is this just gives you twice as many opportunities to do something well and to succeed at it. And again, don't take it for granted the difficulty involved in doing these things. It is not a given that everyone will learn all things. And it's not just for genetic reasons or intelligence or anything like that. It's just a complicated mix of variables and personal previous learning experience that some people just happen to be able to do one thing, or they get it, or they figure it out sooner than another thing. And I think in my case, that was probably why I learned USX first, back in the day, which was the first picking style that I was able to do where I could play clean things fast. And I think that has to do with just this slouchy posture, having stumbled upon it, and perhaps also the way that I was holding the pick at the time just gave me that format. And then, of course, once you have your downward pick slant and your slouch, the only motion that really works there is that. And I didn't even know I was doing any of these things. It wasn't only till later when I kind of first started playing the first few things that I could play cleanly, when I even looked at the motion and was like, oh, look at that. Because you can have the technique and not know it. And you can play phrases that don't really fit, where you're trying to do 3-note per string scales and other things, and it feels awkward. And you don't even realize that you're doing a thing right. You just need to change the vocabulary that you're trying to play. And that leads me to my other point, which is a little bit of a secondary agenda, perhaps. What I was trying to show you in the beginning there is that the two techniques, in my mind, especially when you get good at them, really do have a certain amount of parity between them. A great USX player can definitely keep up with a great DBX player, and I think in a lot of ways certainly outpace them with some of these patterns that would be really difficult to do with DBX motion that you can just blaze on with USX because you have this diagonal USX escape. So things like the Eric Johnson 5s pattern, you can do that just with almost no effort at all when you get good at it. Physically no effort, and the coordination involved to playing a grouping of 5, in this case doing it with pure alternate picking is pretty much an advanced level pure alternate DBX lick, but an intermediate or even, I mean, in my case, it was one of the first things I learned how to do, because as soon as I stumbled across USX, I actually realized that that was what Eric was doing. And so the 5 thing, I mean, I had it within like a month or 2, or I don't even remember, but it was definitely very quickly. And then all kinds of cool scalar patterns that would be really impossible with alternate. That kind of thing. And I'm sure I could do it with DBX now, but I'd have to think about what it is. The other thing you get with USX also is a really cool multi-textural palette. Because some of these picking patterns really only become possible when you use sweeping or legato, you sort of get those things for free because you grow up doing them. So for example, a real classic example would be descending scale playing. You can't do purely alternate picked descending scale or a completely picked descending scale with USX using a 3-note per string fingering. You have to do something like down-up pull-off. And in the context of kind of typical improvisational playing, you probably wouldn't do 5 or 6 strings of that. But you would certainly throw in bits of that here and there just as a way of having textural variety. Stuff like that. And that, when you get good at this, that stuff just comes out. I didn't plan that, write it, rehearse it even. It's just a chaining together of all these different patterns that are kind of like the words of your improvisational language. The USX system, we sometimes hear people say, oh, well, it's got a lot of rules and I don't want to have to memorize these things. I want to be free to express myself. The line starts to get real blurry when you play some of these patterns that would be quite difficult to recreate with DBX. Even when I'm in double escape mode, I'm avoiding a lot of these things. I don't think of it that way. I don't think of, oh, I'm not going to play that because it's too hard. The DBX player will go a different way, will be led a different way than the USX player would. Well, I play the things that are cool that I can play. That's where I go. When I'm improvising, I go towards the stuff that I know and that I like. The thing that's subconscious that you don't realize is that often you're being directed one way or another by your technique. But when you sort of force them to play similar stuff, which is what I was trying to do in the intro there, in some cases you can do identical lines, like ascending lines. I can do that with DBX or USX, same exact notes. But other cases, you run into a situation where the muscle memory is not the same, either because it can't be done or because I just didn't learn it that way, and so you end up with a slightly different variation with the one technique than the other. And that's your DBX way, I think. I don't remember what I did. And so I did the ascending bit with USX because it's got all the sweeping and that's cool. And then I did the descending bit with DBX because, I don't know, just because that's what I did. So anyway, I really encourage you to take a more is better approach with all these techniques, and especially an opportunistic approach where the technique that I can do absolutely has all kinds of capability in it if I want to unlock that capability. If I'm willing to put in the time to develop the vocabulary, even as an improvisational player, don't think of these things as limitations. Think of these things as creative opportunities, and both of these techniques as basically twice the opportunity to learn what is basically a really difficult mechanical motor skill, that being picking with a pick, and giving you even more opportunities to master that.